Hello, everyone. I wish to welcome all of you to the third program of our webinar series, The Secret of Sustainability in Business, Traditional Japanese Braiding, Handmade with Passion and Pride. My name is Yuko Kaifu, and I'm the president of Japan House Los Angeles. It is a great pleasure for us to present this program in collaboration with the Research Institute for the Centennial Management in Japan. I also like to acknowledge Kika Hanazawa, board chair of Passion Girls for Humanity and CEO of VPL, for her precious advice. In today's session, we're going to feature the president of Domyo, a Kumihimo company based in Tokyo, which has been in business for over 350 years. Which is a great example representing business sustainability and longevity. As many of you may know, we are currently presenting in our gallery an exhibition called Kumihimo, The Art of Japanese Silk Braiding by Domyo. Ever since we started this webinar series on business sustainability, we wanted to feature the Kumihimo exhibition from the business sustainability point of view. So we're so thrilled today that we are finally able to invite Mr. Domyo as our guest speaker. For those of you who may not know much about Kumihimo, I'm sure that Mr. Domyo is going to talk a little bit about the history and the line of beautiful products, but they've been used in Japan for over 1,300 years in many ways, like aristocratic garments, kimono, interior furnishing, religious equipment used in temples and shrines. More modern days, they've been used as form of the earrings and bracelets and neckties. And I think that Mr. Domyo is wearing a Kumihimo tie today, so please look forward to it. Ever since the beginning of the exhibition, I've had a chance to hear his stories as the president of Domyo. And I'm sure that you all would enjoy his journey being inspirational, exciting, and very interesting. Before we invite Mr. Domyo and our favorite moderator, Professor Bernstein, Ethan Bernstein, for their fireside chat, I would like to invite Professor Toshio Goto, our expert in centuries-old Japanese businesses, to share with us more background and his perspectives on today's subject matter. Professor Goto is the representative director at Research Institute for Centennial Management. He's also a professor at Graduate School of Management of Japan University of Economics. Professor Goto, can you take a few minutes to give us an overview of centuries-old businesses and your perspectives and input about today's program? Please take it away.
Thank you, Ms. Kaifu. Hello, everybody. I will get you a very quick snapshot of what I've found in the last 20 years. In Japan, I found 25,321 firms in operation over a century, of which 3,937 firms are in operation over 200 years. 1,938 are in operation over 300 years, and 147 in operation over 500 years. Amazing rate, 21 firms in operation over 1,000 years, which I found as of 2015. Quite recently, I added more to the number of centennial firms, as shown here in red. In Japan, as of 2019, I identified 52,328 firms. Many different types of industries they are, such as construction company and state-of-the-art metallurgy. But anyway, what's the story outside of Japan? I also found this. As I said, in Japan, we have 25,321 firms in operation over a century, followed by the United States and Germany, UK, so on. About the number of centuries-old firms, Japan is still at the top, followed by Germany and the UK, so on. What is century-old firms? In one picture, I'll show you this. Founders start with entrepreneurship, of course, and next generation added something new. Add. Generation after generation, innovation after innovation. This is one side of the picture. Another side of the picture is they faced many disasters, such as Spain flu, back 100 years ago, pandemic and great earthquake we often have in Japan, and so on. So crisis after crisis, they recovered from that. And meanwhile, they added something new. This is a very, very simplistic picture of what is Centennial Firms is. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Domyo, one of the Centennial Firms, which how they continued innovation while keeping tradition. And still, how they confronted and survived cities of crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Goto. It's always great to hear your broader perspectives and broader picture because before we go into specific case studies of Domyo. So thank you so much. Now, without further ado, I'd like to invite to the screen our moderator, Professor Ethan Bernstein. Professor Bernstein is Associate Professor in the Organizational Behavior Unit at the Harvard Business School. He earned his PhD in management at Harvard, where he also received a joint degree in law and business administration. During his college years at Amherst College, he spent some time in Japan studying at Doshisha University in Kyoto. So Ethan, please, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Yuko. And let me first say, welcome to all of you who joined us for what I think will be a fascinating conversation. I know I'm very excited to speak with our celebrity guest today, who is Mr. Kiichiro Dōmyō. He is the representative director and president of the Domyo Company Limited. And as Yuko mentioned, he is the 10th generation leader of the company. He studied architecture at Waseda University in Tokyo. And in 2012, he took over Domyo as representative director. Though dedicated to researching and preserving traditional Japanese kumihimo, he also collaborates with contemporary fashion designers, architects, and engineers to explore new applications for diverse arenas. And so to Goto Sensei's point, we'll explore both the old and the new in our conversation today. So he's going to tell us more about the rich history of his company, but Domyo is a 370-year-old company that started in the mid-17th century, so we will ask him to be brief. It has been run by the Domyo family since the mid-18th century. Let me also take a moment here to welcome our interpreter, David Neptune. David, thank you so much for your help today. Domyo-san, and please join us on the screen. Welcome, Domyo-san.
こんにちは。本日はビジネスサスティナビリティのウェビナーにご参加いただきましてありがとうございます。株式会社道明の代表取締役の道明喜一郎と申します。本日は日本語で話させていただきたいと思います。
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me for this business sustainability panel talk. I am very excited to be here with you all. My name is Kiichiro Dōmyō, and today I'm very excited to be speaking with you all.
それでは早速ですが、株式会社道明の事業内容についてご説明させていただければと思います。
So I think I'll jump right into a quick explanation of my company.
先ほどもご説明いただいたようにですね、道明は組紐というですね、非常に古くから日本に伝わるシルクの糸で紐を作る技法を使って商品を作っています。
So as explained previously, I am the head of a company that creates kumihimo, which is a very old and traditional braiding technique that uses silk string.
私の会社は東京の上野という町にあります。江戸時代の地図です。こちらにあります。
My company is located in the Ueno area of Tokyo, and this is a map from the Edo period where my cursor is where the company is located.
こちらがですね、明治時代の建物です。そしてこちらが昭和の太平洋戦争の前にあった建物で、こちらが昭和の戦後にあった建物です。
And so as you can see, there's the Meiji era store, the Showa era store before the Pacific War, and finally the Showa era store after the war.
それぞれ関東大震災で倒壊したりですね、戦争で燃えたりしてですね、亡くなってしまったんですが、その都度に新しい建物を建てて仕事をしてきました。
So during the Kanto Great Earthquake or during the war, we had to rebuild the company, but we have persevered through the years.
そして現在の建物がこちらです。お店がこのようになっておりまして、ここに数多くの組紐の帯締めが並んでおります。帯締めというのは女性の和服の日本の伝統的な衣装である和服の帯を締める紐です。
And as you can see here, the current store is shown on the left and the interior of the store is on the right. And on display here are various obijime, which are a type of kumihimo, which are used to hold the obi, or the sash, the tie around the waist.
帯締め、組紐で作られる帯締めというものは、さまざまな技法やさまざまな色、色彩ですね、によって作られております。
And there are various techniques used to create these obijime.
このように絵柄を描き出すものもあれば、場所場所で区切って色をつけているところもあります。
So as you can see here with the ayadashi technique, we can have certain patterns, or you can also have, as you see in the lower right, certain sections that have a different pattern or effect.
また、伝統的な絵画やこういった工芸品から発想を得て組紐を作ることもあります。
And as you can see here, we are inspired also by some traditional paintings, or also by ceramics as well. So various areas of inspiration.
道明の組紐作りの特徴は、すべて手作りで組紐を作っているところにあります。
Characteristic of Domyo is that everything is handmade.
こちらはシルクの糸に色を染めているところで、だいたい1年間で5000色ほどの色を染めます。
And you can see here on the right-hand side our color dyeing process of the silk string, and we color about 5,000 different colors in a typical year.
またこちらは伝統的な組紐を作る道具でして、高台という道具と丸台という道具、こういった道具で手作りで組紐を作っております。
And so as you can see here, we have the various tools that we use to create the kumihimo, and you can see the two typical ways that we do so. There's the tall version, the takadai, and the circular version called the marudai.
また、近年は和服だけではなく、こういったネクタイやアクセサリーなど洋服を着る方にも身につけていただける組紐を作っております。
And as you can see here, there's many accessories that we also create in recent years, like the neckties or the hair ties as well as these earrings and necklaces that you see on the right-hand side.
また、道明はこれまで日本各地にある古い歴史的な組紐を調査して研究してきました。
Domyo has researched all of the deep histories that surround kumihimo all over Japan.
現在は日本中にある歴史で、古い組紐ほぼすべて、調査が終わって、復元を完了しています。それは現在ロサンゼルスのジャパンハウスでも展示されております。
So currently we have researched almost all of the kumihimo traditions in all of Japan and recreated these at our company, and you can see many of them on display at Japan House currently.
こういった古い組紐を研究で得られた技術を現代の組紐作りに生かしております。
So we use these ancient techniques and traditions to create our current kumihimo that you can see.
また、現代のアーティストやファッションデザイナー、建築家といった方々ともコラボレーションして、これまでになかったような新しい組紐を作っております。
We've also collaborated with several artists and designers to create modern kumihimo that have never been seen before.
また、日本全国各地に組紐教室を運営してまして、現在400名ほどの生徒がいらっしゃいます。
We also hold classes to teach people how to create kumihimo all over Japan, and we currently have about 400 students.
職人だけでなく、一般の方にも組紐を楽しんでもらうことによって、組紐の技術が途絶えることなく広がっていくことを目指しています。
So our intention is for not only the skilled craftsmen and women to learn the kumihimo technique, but for the general public to also learn this so that it can expand and be carried down through the generations.
それでは次にですね、組紐を実際に組んでいるところの動画を見ていただければと思います。
And next, I'd like to show you a video of the actual making of kumihimo.
これは絹糸を染めているところです。
And this is where they're dyeing the silk strings.
染液の中に、水の中に染料を入れて絹糸をくぐらせていきます。
The dyes are diluted in the water, and the string is put through this die.
染め上がった糸は組紐を組める状態にするために準備作業をします。
And we prep the string, as you can see, for the braiding process in this way after they're dyed.
こちらは高台という台を組んでいるところです。
And this is the takadai, or the tall table.
このようにヘラで糸を打ち込んでいくことでしっかりした組紐ができます。
And as you can see, this flat tool is used to make a very tight weave of this braid.
こちらは丸台という台で平らな円盤の上で糸を動かすことで台の下の方に組紐ができていきます。
And for this circular table, or marudai, we overlap the spools of string, and the weave, the braid rather, is actually created at the center and goes down as it's created.
以上となります。続きましてですね、ちょっと早速少しですね、駆け足なんですが、会社の中の様子を見てみたいと思います。
And now I am going to actually share a little bit of what the company looks like with you all. So I'm going to move.
聞こえていますでしょうか。こちらが2階の、会社の2階の工房になります。
And so this is our second floor work area at our company.
このように染め上がった糸が干してあります。
And these are the silk strings that have already been dyed that are drying on these poles.
今、職人が高台で高麗組という名前の組紐を組んでいます。
And this is a craftsman who is creating a type of kumihimo called korai gumi.
次にお店の方に行ってみたいと思います。
And next, I will share our store.
お店の案内は以上となります。
And that's the end of the tour of the store.
戻りたいと思います。
And I'll get back to my desk.
Domyo-san, thank you so much for that introduction, for welcoming us into your world. I feel like I already am your student, and I'm looking forward to hearing more, although we'll try not to make you climb any more stairs in this session.
若干息が上がっております。
So
I'm a little out of breath.
Well, let me start with this question. Actually, one of the members of the audience has already asked how she might be able to learn this craft on Zoom. So you might be able to comment on that. But before you do, I'm curious about you. I could imagine as a 10th generation Domyo, you would have been trained in how to make kumihimo very early in life. When did you first learn to make it?
そうですね。ちょっと今現在、海外に向けてのレッスンはしてないんですが、おそらくアメリカでも組紐の教室をやってらっしゃる方がいらっしゃるのではないかと思いますので、ぜひちょっとそういう方に習っていただければと思います。
First off, currently we aren't doing any lessons for overseas audiences or students, but I'm sure that you could find someone in the US. There are overseas teachers who teach this as well.
私がですね、初めて習ったのはですね、おそらく大学生ぐらいの時から先ほどの糸を染めるようなことはずっと手伝いでしていたんですが、 実際に組紐を組み始めたのは30歳を過ぎたぐらいからですね。会社を継ぐことが決まってから始めました。
I actually, in college, I started to sort of help out here and there with the Kumihimo process, but I was actually past the age of 30 when I realized that I was going to also be taking over the company, that I actually started doing Kumihimo seriously myself.
Fascinating. Well, I'd like to understand more about that. But before we do, I had two questions for Domyo-san about the process itself, particularly where do the silk strings come from and why are they called strings rather than cord or yarn? And then there was a question as to where they procure the dye. Who makes the dye that they use?
毛糸、ウールの組紐というのも、紀元前には中国でなどでたくさん作られていたんですけど、日本に組紐の技術が伝わってから日本ではやはり全てシルクで作られていますね。やはりシルクというのはすごく光沢が美しくて、非常に高級な組紐にはぴったりの素材です。
The wool string also exists, and there are kumihimo made with wool string, especially in China in before Christ years. However, in Japan, we started using silk because silk was a very beautiful look and also suited for very high quality work.
あと、染めの材料ですよね。シルクじゃなくて、染めの材料はですね、2つの種類がありまして、一般の製品に使うケミカルな化学的な染料も使いますし、あと古い組紐を復元する場合などには天然染料を使いますので、そういったケミカルな材料はやはり世界的に流通しているものを使いますし、天然染料は国内で栽培されたもの作られたものを使っております。
So there are two types of dyes that we use. One are the chemical dyes, and the other type are the natural dyes when we are trying to replicate a very traditional or ancient design that are made in Japan, but the chemical dyes we get from all over the world.
You've got obviously an audience that's very keen to know about the craft, but we also have an audience keen to know about you. And so, Domyo-san, you said you didn't enter the business until later in life. What was it like growing up in a family dedicated to this craft? And didn't you always know you were going into the family business?
はい、そうですね。やはり小さい頃からいろいろと会社に行ったり、工場に行ったりして、会社とはよく接してきたんですが、実際まだその頃はですね、私のいとこが社長をやっておりまして、少し17歳ぐらい年の離れたいとこなんですが、まだ、特に私が継ぐという話にはなってなかったので、全く違う仕事に就こうと思っていました。
Yes, that is true. I was interacting a lot with Kumihimo since I was very young, and he would visit, of course, our store and the factory. But at the time, when I was young, my cousin, who is 17 years older, was the president of the company. And I didn't think I was going to be taking over the company. So I was looking at another field.
So how did you ultimately end up taking over the company, and how have you felt about it?
その私のいとこはですね、アメリカで数学の博士号を取っているようなですね、非常に優秀な方で、組紐の構造をかなり数学的に解明していったので、おそらく歴史的にも一番組紐を理解していた人なんじゃないかなと思うんですが、やはりいろいろ大変だったみたいで、ちょっと早期にリタイアすることにしたいというふうな希望があって、私にちょっとやってくれないかというふうに頼まれました。
So actually, my cousin had a PhD in mathematics and was very intelligent. And he really researched deeply the kumihimo in a numerological way, as well as a historical way, and had a deep understanding of the tradition. But he, I think, had a lot of stress in that area and wanted to retire young. So that's why I ended up taking over the business.
はい。それで、ちょっと誰かがやらなければいけないなという気持ちはありましたし、私、建築の設計をやっていたんですが、小さい頃から組紐にはとても馴染みがありましたし、実際やってみると、すごく建築と組紐の共通する部分なども感じられて、やはりストラクチャーとデザインが非常に表裏一体というか関係している というところが建築も組紐も似てるところだったので、すぐに楽しく仕事をすることができるようになりました。
I kind of had this realization someone has to take over the business. And at the time, I was an architect. And so when I went into creating Kumihimo, it was actually a very related field with, structure and design. And so because of that, it was a very easy and fun transition actually for me.
And how did you had obviously stepped away from the business and then came back with that external perspective. What did you think of the business itself? Was it, what were you hoping to do with it, and what are you hoping to do with it?
私が入った頃はですね、いろいろと技術的には素晴らしいものがあったんですけど、ちょっといろいろ経営が整理されてないところが、ちょっとバランスが悪いところがあったりして、あと建物も非常に古くなってたりとかですね、したので、その辺の収益のバランスとかですね、設備、建物を新しくしたりとかですね、あと非常に高齢化が進んでいまして、新しい人が少なかったので、若い人をたくさん取って採用して、若い人と上の、非常に技術のある年配の人から若い人に技術が伝わるような仕組みを作りました。
So I felt that when I started, there was really wonderful technique, but I wasn't very confident that there was a balance within the company, and the building itself was quite old. And so I felt that the building needed to be fixed and some new concepts needed to be brought in. Another concern was that the skilled workers were aging. And so there weren't a lot of new people. And I realized that new people needed to be brought in, and this old tradition needed to be transferred to the newer generations.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you've done to make it newer? And particularly with this idea towards, as one of the audience members asked, the sustainability of the Kumihimo business. How are you thinking of spreading the culture and awareness of the art in novel ways?
新しいことを始めるにもですね、非常に組紐の長い歴史の中で作られてきた技術が大事ですので、そういった技術をまず学んで、それを利用して、例えば洋装の新しいプロダクトを作ったりとか、あと技術をより多くの人に体験して楽しんでもらうものを作るのではなくて、時間とか体験、エクスペリエンスを楽しんでもらう、そういった新しいビジネスを始めたりしています。
To do new things, I knew that first, the most important thing was to learn the technique in its detail. So that was the most important foundation. And from there, we've also adapted the kumihimo to be used in Western clothing. And to also have more people enjoy this, we've taken the kumihimo and created actual experiences people can have that are also enjoyable in creating kumihimo. And so those are some of the efforts we've been having.
あと、サスティナビリティという意味ではですね、やはり手作りで商品を、組紐を作るということはですね、非常に機械で動かすことによってやっぱ炭素が出たりもしませんし、手で作るので作りすぎたりして、もう商品を破棄したりするということもないのでですね、やはり組紐、または日本のそういった手作りの伝統工芸というものは非常にもう本来サスティナブルな仕事なんじゃないかなというふうに思っておりますので、そういったところがまた注目されるといいなというふうに思っております。
So in terms of the sustainability aspect, all of these kumihimo are handmade and there are no machines involved. And that means there's less of a carbon footprint. And there's also the aspect that we don't make too many because there won't be leftovers because they're all handmade. And handmade crafts themselves are sustainable in that way. And so I hope that many people are able to see that as well.
There have been a few questions that fall along these lines. So one of the most specific was whether or not the designs, the patterns are fixed, or if there's a trend towards newer versions of the patterns. But also more broadly, are there ways in which you're using your design background, your architectural design background, to innovate the appearance of the craft to make it attractive to young people, to modern generations alike?
非常にもう 古くから作られている組紐を、そのまま帯締めとして作っている場合もありますし、それとともに新しい柄とか新しい色合いの組紐も、たくさん作っておりますので、だいたい1ヶ月に10種類ぐらいは新しいデザインの組紐を作っております。
So the answer is yes. We have many of the old patterns of kumihimo that we make for the obijime, but we also create many new patterns consistently. And so I would say every month we come up with about 10 new designs.
その中でも、やはり、例えば奈良時代に作られた組紐とか、鎌倉時代に作られた組紐とか、そういったものの、ストラクチャーの部分はですね、変えない場合も多いんですが、新しくストラクチャーを作るっていう場合もありまして、そういった時にですね、私も建築的な考え方とかを非常に取り入れて、組紐のデザインをしております。
So when we take designs, for instance, from the Nara period or the Kamakura period, we do indeed preserve the structure, and the structure for many of the other kumihimo, we do change and update. And when we create these newer structures, then I definitely bring in the design elements that I learned as an architect.
組紐っていうのは一次元の紐なんですね。ワンディメンション。で、例えば織物は平面なんで、二次元。で、建築は立体ですので三次元なんですけど、実は組紐の中にはですね、糸が非常に上から下に非常に複雑に動き回りながら、まっすぐ進行方向に進んでいくという非常に三次元的な構造が、組紐の中に含まれています。
So kumihimo itself, if you look at the string, it's actually one dimension because it's a line. But once you weave or braid together, then that becomes two dimensions. And then the third dimension would be like with architecture. But actually, I found that with kumihimo, with the overlapping going over and under in these complex patterns, it actually is utilizing all three dimensions.
I love hearing it. It sounds like you're having a lot of fun.
楽しんでやっております。
Yes, I definitely enjoy my work.
I'd like to ask a question, and perhaps both you, Domyo-san, and then Goto-sensei, if you'd like, you're welcome to contribute to the conversation now or later. But one of our audience members asked the question, to what other crafts, to what other centuries-old crafts would you compare yourself? And I will add to that, and given that answer, what constraints do you feel to stay true to the traditions and yet also innovate for the future? As Goto Sensei said, it's all about new, but also true to the history. How do you do that?
組紐と近い工芸というと、例えば日本刺繍ですね。糸でチクチクと糸を刺して絵柄を描き出す刺繍などは組紐と同じぐらいの時期に中国から大陸から伝わってきまして、それで日本でまた独自の進化を、組紐と同じように独自の進化を遂げて現代にも生きている工芸ですので、そうですね、日本刺繍とかは非常に比べると良いかもしれません。
I think first of all, in terms of traditional crafts from Japan, I would compare kumihimo to Japanese embroidery, which also came to Japan around the same time from China and also still exists in Japan as a modern art form as well.
やはり組紐という仕事自体が、日本の中でもそれほどまだ、世界的にも知られてないし、日本でも非常に、小さいビジネスというか業界なので、それほど伝統に、例えば織物の世界とかに比べると、それほど伝統に縛られている感じはしないので、かなり私的には、というかうちの会社はもう独自に昔から自由にどんどん新しいことにチャレンジしております。
So kumihimo is not a very well-known art form outside of Japan, and even in Japan, it's a very small sort of sphere of knowledge, and so it's definitely not as tied to tradition, I would say, as, for instance, maybe weaving is. And so it's a very free thing and always has been for my company.
So let me ask one more question about the future then. And this has come up from a couple of different attendees and also a question I have. The future of the company is obviously tied to Kumihimo, but it's also tied to your family. Can you share with us thoughts about the next generation? Do you know who will take over, and how do you imagine that will go? Because many of the audience are worried, it would seem, that the next generation won't have interest in small crafts like Kumihimo.
やはりずっと家族、親戚でつないできたので、今、子供が2人いる、まだ小さいんですが、子供が2人いるんですが、できれば、家族で継いでいってほしいなというところは思っております。あまり強制はしたくないんですけど、いろいろこの楽しさとかですね、組紐の楽しさとか、経営の面白さを感じてもらえればなというふうに思っております。
All this time, we've been able to continue this company with through the family and our relatives. And I currently have 2 children, but I hope that they will take over the family business eventually. I would never force them to do so, but I hope they see the joy and the fascination in it that I see.
それと、経営とともにですね、やっぱり技術者の育成というのが非常に大事になってて、次の世代の技術者をどんどん育成していくということが非常に大事なんですが、近年ですとやはり京都の伝統工芸の世界とかでもですね、どんどん技術を持った人がいなくなっちゃったとか、これが絶えてしまったみたいな話をすごく聞くんですけど、私の会社はそうならないように、もうとにかく新しく技術者、染めとか組ができる人を毎年育成しておりますので、次世代をとにかく作っていきたいと思います。
So not only the managerial staff, but the craftsmen who know this technique are really crucial to the business, and I think are really important to continue to educate these people. And so we keep hearing in recent years of traditions in Kyoto, for instance, which is the sort of central hub of tradition in Japan, where traditions are being lost because there aren't people who can carry them forward. But I want to make sure that that doesn't happen with us, and that we're able to educate new skilled craftsmen and women who every year can learn and become part of our team to create Kumihimo.
Let me ask Goto Sensei. Domyo-san, I'll be back to you in a moment with a question, but Goto Sensei, you've heard much from Domyo-san, and you've seen the almost 20 questions that I think he's managed to answer, because he's hit on each one as he responds to the questions we've asked. What patterns are you observing? What would you contribute to this conversation, since you've had such a wide lens on industries, particularly these kinds of industries that have been around for centuries?
I have many things to say, to share with you and the audience. Most importantly, what is a business for human beings, for the society, so on? Is quantity matter? I do not think so. People are concerned about the small size of the market of Kumihimo. It doesn't matter. As far as we see, Domyo finds opportunity in it. And if the opportunity grows to the future, that is wonderful. And that will attract younger generation to join, to succeed the business. This is what I like to add. Another thing, more important than the quantity is, of course, quality of the business. Again, the question is, what is the business for? Domyo-san is not working only for money. Money may be important only to some extent. He should have something very, very important, more important than money. Maybe he may like to contribute to the culture of Japan, preservation of the culture, or to the beauty of human life. I like the question to Domyo-san, what motivate?
長くずっと受け継がれた伝統的な技術を研究して受け継いでいくっていうことと、新しいものを作るっていうことを2つの車輪として進めていく。それをバランスを取りながらうまくやるっていうことは結構やっててでも面白いですね。過去にも行けるし未来にも行けるっていう仕事というのは非常に面白いなというふうに思っております。
Domyo-san made a very strong statement. We can go either to 2 directions. We can go to the past, and also we can go to the future. That is great. In Japan, there was a question some time ago, how many traditional crafts do exist in Japan beside Kumihimo. As of now, we have 236 traditional crafts registered by the government, of which Kumihimo is one of them. By definition, these traditional crafts must be in Japan at least 100 years. I would say I'd like to share the statement which Domyo-san made just minutes ago or the second ago. The past has many potential for the future. This is the case with traditional crafts. So we research history, not only for the history purpose, but for the future. We can find many things. And this will be resulting in another business in the future. So far, we talked about the design of Kumihimo, but Domyo-san mentioned briefly about the structure side. I rather see huge potential for the future in the structure side. Domyo-san may be a part of space development industry sometime, if he finds something.
はい、そうですね。全く新しい分野でも何か組紐を用いて、例えば医療だったりとか、宇宙開発とか、いろんな分野でも活かせたら面白いなというふうに思っております。
Definitely possible. David,
I do think,
you can translate.
Yeah, I do think that I'd like to also work into the medical industry and, as you're saying, the space development industry as well in the future.
So Domyo-san, we're coming towards the end of our time, and I want to make sure I get a chance to ask you my final question. I asked Goto Sensei what he learned from what you've said, and I'll talk a couple about my lessons as well. But first, what would you like us to learn beyond everything you've said so far? What message would you want to make sure we've heard that you've learned over time?
とにかく組紐という技術がですね、日本の、例えば織物とか漆に比べるとまだまだ全然知られていないんですが、技法としては織物や編み物、ウェービングとかと並ぶ3つ目の3種類目の技術でして、非常に世界的にも、とにかく紐を作ることなので、普遍的な構造を持っておりますので、様々な用途に使えるし、またものすごく美しいですね、日本にしかない美学、美しさの世界が広がっておりますので、ぜひですね、ちょっとアメリカの方々、そして世界中の皆様に組紐という技術の、実はこんな技術が日本にもまだまだあったんだっていうことを、ぜひちょっと覚えて知っていただきたいなというふうに思っております。
So Kumihimo itself, I think, is not as well known as some of the traditional weaving techniques or urushi, the lacquer that you find in Japan that is so well known. But I think it's just as sophisticated and should be thought of as a third tradition amongst those that I just mentioned. I think they have a very unchanging, relevant sort of structure. It's a braid, and I think can be used for many things. And this is a really beautiful Japanese tradition that I hope everyone who has learned of this today can remember this and tell people about this tradition, because it is absolutely worthy of being shared and spread to the rest of the world.
そうですね。もう一つとにかく組紐って紐なのですごく細くて小さいんですけど、よく近づいて見ていただくとすごい綺麗ですので、ぜひジャパンハウスでいらしていただいた際は近づいてその細かさを楽しんでいただければと思います。
And finally, also kumihimo, the word himo means string. So it's very thin, but when you get really close to the kumihimo, it's absolutely beautiful. So I hope that when you visit Japan House, you get really close to the kumihimo to get a look at the beautiful detail.
Thank you. I do hope to get very close to it. And I appreciate having gotten so close to you today and for your openness to share your thoughts with us.
ありがとうございました。
I'd like to offer just a couple of closing thoughts, and then I'll turn it back to Yuko to close the session. My thoughts may or may not be visible here, but I've been taking some notes. What I found most interesting, the basis of your work, I realize my handwriting is not clear, but architecture, mathematics, structure, design, balancing old and new, both the tradition of the past and the future, all to some extent from this little red square that you started us with. It's that building that's been in the same location for generations and generations, where people have made these products by hand. They preserve and update as they go. But I liked the fact you told us, I learned first. The first thing you did was you learned not just how to make the product, but all these different pieces. And maybe I'm not as much of an expert as Goto sensei in these centuries old businesses, but I do know that many successful businesses start by learning first. And I appreciate that message. And I appreciate what that means for being able to blend the old and the new, just as Goto sensei said before. So Domyo-san, thank you for that lesson. Thank you so much for all the questions to our audience. Thank you so much to everyone on the panel. And thank you for allowing me to be your student today, Domyo-san. I learned a lot. Yuko, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Domyo-san and Goto sensei. It was wonderful, and it was, I have to admit that I was also taking notes, and there are exactly, I jotted down exactly the same words as Ethan, like architecture, Kumihimo, structure, design, similarities, and then old and new, all converged into one beautiful concept. And that's, and also to quote Professor Goto, past and tradition has many potentials for the future. And that's exactly what Domyo-san is pursuing for the future and for the future generation. I hope that both of your children, or one of them at least, will take over your wonderful business for the next generations. It's wonderful. Thank you so very much. I learned a lot too. Now, I'd like to remind everyone of our exhibition, and thank you, Mr. Domyo, for mentioning about our exhibition once more. Kumihimo, the Art of Japanese Silk Braiding by Domyo, will continue until March the 6th. And I hope that when, if the viewers are around in this area, please come visit to take a closer look at each of the products. They are beautiful, and you can find much more when you take a closer look at them. Our operating hours are from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily. Please also follow us on social media platforms at japanhousela.com to stay up to date on our events and programs. Last but not least, we're soon going to announce our upcoming exhibition on the art of ramen bowls, which explores various aspects of ramen and ramen bowl, both from the culinary perspectives and the ramen bowl designs perspective. So, and we're also planning to host a number of ramen pop-up and related programs. So please stay tuned. So thank you again, everyone, all the speakers. I mean, we really appreciate it. And thank you, David, for the wonderful translation. And thank you again, and I hope to see you again soon.
ありがとうございました。